city where people often say, well, there are 5 white guys that make all the decisions. And there was some truth in that. They were trying to make sure that the city's development did not undermine their own social and economic position. And it's only in recent years that some of those people who are now, in their 80s maybe, who are kind of willing to say, yeah, that's kind of how I thought about things at the time. The 70s were not a good decade for Chattanooga or for most cities. They were particularly not good for cities that had industrial economies. That was sort of the beginning of the period in which those economies began to falter. There were technical innovations in communications and transportation, and there were political developments around the world that obviously made it less feasible to maintain those blue-collar, unionized manufacturing jobs. They didn't disappear, but by and large, in most places, they shrunk. Chattanooga in 1970 was the city with the largest percentage of its population engaged in manufacturing of any city in America. So Fort Wayne and a lot of the industrial cities of the Great Lakes region actually didn't match the concentration of manufacturing in our economy. And we were also the city declared by Walter Cronkite to be the dirtiest city in America. The dirtiest air of any city in the country. And Americans began to care about the air along about 1970. The Clean Air Act, Earth Day, and so forth. So there was a kind of public demand that some of those industries begin to clean up their act, which increased their cost of doing business, which increased in some ways the further decline of our industrial economy, which is the only economy that we have known. And I would say if you read the newspapers of the last 20 years, you would see that the most of the economic stories of Chattanooga would still be the hemorrhaging of our manufacturing enterprises. Most of the big stories are of big companies shrinking or closing. And that's, and nonetheless, Chattanooga is currently viewed as a turnaround city. It's a city that has come back from the brink and refashioned itself in a way that works for the 21st century. And I know that part of what our conversation is about is sort of, so where are you in that process, and so where are we in that process, and how did we proceed when we recognized that we were in trouble? Well, you start with the fact that not everyone agrees that you're in trouble. There are people who say things are just fine here. I haven't felt pain yet, and I don't want things to change. And then there's another group of people who will say, we're so hapless in community. We haven't done anything great in so long. Atlanta is what we should have been. Atlanta is the model of a successful city. We're the model of the doomed little dirty brother. And we have no future, so why bother? And then there are a few people who are willing to say, you know, if we don't do something, it's going to get bad, worse for everyone. When people sense that the community is in decline, their worst instincts come out. I don't know that this place has ever experienced the degree of decline that Chattanooga did, but we had social divisions that kind of erupted as people began to point fingers of who's to blame for the fact that the good deal is going away. The owners of the industry said it was the greedy unions that wouldn't get real about what you had to pay in order to operate a factory in America, and so they were going to have to move off somewhere else. And the people who were losing their jobs were saying that the greedy owners who didn't give a rip about us, they've got a good life up there on Lookout Mountain, and we're down here hurting, and you get into this cycle of who screwed up that put us in this rough place. Now, I was working for a private charitable foundation at the time, and that is an unlikely agency for undertaking the renewal of a city. What foundations typically do is invite proposals, review them, and award grants. So very quietly, we get lots of praise of those who say yes, and it is a time-consuming and intellectually challenging, but not very threatening job. For instance, you're not really very accountable to anybody. If your work doesn't produce results, nobody's going to, you're not going to go out of business because you didn't do a good job. Foundations have to engage in a sort of self-imposed discipline for performance because there aren't external drivers like profits and so forth to make that happen. And the chairman of the Lyndhurst Foundation was a 55-year-old son of the donor. Now, the donor was part of that corporate generation. The donor crossed over the bridge to his job at 8:05 every morning, and people could set their watch. He was a very regular, conservative man, and very private. And his son was conservative with a flavor. And he was just cut from a different cloth, and he was profane, and he was dynamic, and he was threatening, and he was exquisitely sensitive, and it was fabulous working for him because every day was, your life at risk. And I realized very early on, if I'm afraid of this guy, I should just leave now. And if I'm afraid of being fired, I should just go ahead now because he will fire me. He fires everybody at some point. He wants things done. He wants them done well. He wants them done yesterday. But we had one of those transformative moments in a board meeting early 80s, when I was, by the way, 30 years old, and the executive director was 32 years old. So this, I'm not sure, but I would guess that most of your foundations in this area would not have a profile like that. It was a very youthful foundation, naive. We didn't know a lot, therefore we didn't know that things couldn't be done. And we were looking at a set of proposals that I thought were the best ones we had brought to the table in 3 years. And I noticed the chairman of our board was looking at his watch, taking it off, taking off his glasses, and I knew we were losing him. And at some point he pushed the proposal files off the table and said, "This doesn't amount to a hill of beans." Actually, he didn't say hill of beans. Something similar to that. And he said, "This city is in dire straits. I love this place. I am not going to let this place go where it's going. And these proposals ain't going to get it." In fact, these were his words, and I'm not sure he ever was this clear about anything.